Okay, so I'm going to tell you today about a study that I did measuring the human biofield, measuring the light coming out of our bodies, what are called biophotons. And I did this together with my husband, who's also my colleague and co-researcher, Harry Jabs, who's a physicist and engineer, remarkable hardware software guy who put together all the apparatus and who was the co-researcher on this study. I have to move this thing out of the way, excuse me. So, first of all, what is light? Light actually is an enigma in science. Even it's very primitive, obviously. It's how we see, it's our greatest sense. It's a component in most creation myths and religious cosmologies. It's often a symbol of the divine or of the spirit, an indwelling vitality, a sign of underlying unseen vibrance. But what does science tell us? Well, we know that light is emitted from excited matter. So when our bodies are excited or at a higher energy state and then they settle down, they emit light. And that's true of all levels of orders, of tissues, of electrons within our systems, of even stars out there in the galaxy. So light is coming out of excited matter, and then the matter falls down to what's called a ground state. And it has the top speed limit in the universe, 186,000 miles a second, according to Einstein. Nobody's ever gone faster than that yet. It travels through space. It doesn't seem to need a medium. It can go right through the vacuum and the sunlight arrives. It takes 8 minutes to get to Earth. Light has what we call Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde features of particle and wave. Sometimes it behaves like a particle and sometimes like a wave, and it really depends upon our experimental setup in science, which we see in the experiment. But the actual nature of light is really unknown. And by the way, that's true of virtually all the concepts of science. We only discover the relationships between things, but fundamentally, science cannot tell us what matter is or what energy is or what the soul is or the mind. All of those things, we can have our intuitions about, but we can only do experiments and look at interrelationships of these things. So let me define the particle of light is called a photon. That's a quantum. That's the lowest level, lowest amount of light possible. There's no way of dividing that up. It's a packet of energy, pure energy. Yet it has no mass. It has no matter associated with it. So it's a packet of pure energy. And a biophoton is a particle of light coming out of a living organism, such as us. And it's very, very weak light. We do not see a stream of light coming out of the organism. We literally count the particles of light coming out of the organisms because it's so very weak. But it seems to be important. Now, the old worldview, what we might call the mechanistic view based on Newtonian or reductionist science, is that this light coming out of living things is not important. It has no role that they can see, and therefore they kind of dismiss it. Some even think it's waste. But those of us who take an integrative view don't see any waste in the universe, and anything coming out of the body has some sensibility, some meaning, some purpose. And myself and others have proposed that biophotons have a role in bioregulation and or biocommunication, for example, between two humans. And it might be something involved in the therapeutic partnership and in feeling love. So we'll see more later. So Dr. Fritz Popp is the scientist in Germany under whom I studied in the 1990s. About 25 years ago, I went to his lab in Germany, then in Kaiserslautern, and he's now retired. And I learned his technique. He was one of the few people measuring these biophotons from humans and other critters. And he said something very interesting about it. He wrote a book back then. The name of the book is Electromagnetic Bio Information, and it's in English. And it was really earth-shaking in its time to say that energy could hold information because In science, the only information that was thought to be held by living things would be in their molecules or in their genes. And so the idea that energy could hold information was very novel in those years. He further said that the energy coming out of living things is coherent when the organisms are healthy, and when they're sick, for example in cancer, there's a loss of this coherence. And he thought that this could be very nice to develop into a new diagnostic, for example, for cancer. I remember one of the experiments I did back at his lab was to distinguish between organic and commercial alfalfa sprouts. They were brought in by a third party, and I was blind as to which were organic and which were commercial. And I measured the light coming out of them and then reported on that. And the organic were emitting more light than the commercial sprouts, which was very interesting. And of course, one can taste that difference sometimes. It has more flavor, the organic. So there was the idea that maybe this sort of measurement could lead to new diagnostics and even new energetic therapies. If we could understand the light coming out of the human, we might be able to build devices that deliver such light or enhance our biophoton emission. So when Fritz Popp used the word coherent, this is what he meant. For example, a laser light delivers coherent energy. That means all the waves are in phase, as you see here. They're in harmony with one another. Whereas incoherent light, such as coming out of an LED flashlight, the waves are not in phase. They're at odds with one another, like tangled hair, for example. So Fritz Popp is saying that when there's health, there's more coherence in the light emitted from us. And that extends to the physiology. Let me explain that. Here is a heart tachogram. What is a tachogram? It's a plot of heart rate over time. And this is a typical healthy person, but not very well regulated energetically. And you see the heart rate is showing some variability. It's around 70, but it's going up a little bit, then down. And maybe this person is thinking some maybe stressful thought when it goes up, and then relaxing more when it goes down. That would be the usual thing. The monkey mind is sort of controlling this heart rhythm, and it's incoherent. But the next slide shows what happens when someone practices a mind-body modality like yoga. This is the tachogram of a woman, 42 years old. She was a Kripalu yoga teacher of mine, and this is her heart rate variability. This is the same plot, the tachogram showing beats per minute versus time, and this time frame is 5 minutes. Now what's interesting about this are you see waves that are together, they look regular, relatively regular, indicating a level of coherence in the heart rhythm beyond the beats of the heart. This rhythm, if you count how many of these waves are occurring in about 1 minute, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6.5 to 7. Well, that's perfect yogic breathing, because 6 to 8 breaths per minute is ideal in the resting state. Deep abdominal yogic breathing, and that is not associated with stress but with relaxation. So this was this teacher in the zone of the benefits that she showed from practicing yoga for many years. This particular yogic breath, which is now pacing the heart and giving a coherent rhythm in the physiology. So it shows an example of high-level wellness that is obtained when one practices mind-body modalities that translate into the energy field of the body, namely the heart waves. And look how variable her heart is, from about 60 beats a minute all the way up to about high 80s with each breath. So the heart is slowing down and speeding up with each inhalation, slowing down with each exhalation. That's the rhythm here. So now let me tell you about my Biophoton experimental setup, how we measured it. We had to build custom apparatus to do this. So we built a dark closet. It was made out of plywood. It's 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet high. And the interior is painted black because we don't want stray light bouncing around. And out here you see some of the electronics that powered the detector. And here's the interior of the chamber. There are 3 stools for 2 subjects who might be interacting, for example, an energy healer and a patient, and myself as the experimenter who's going to move this detector around. This is the photomultiplier tube detector that counts photons over each second, and it's suspended on what is the guts of a dental lamp without the light. We chose that because it has infinite degrees of mobility to move it around the person's body to measure the biophotons. The interior must be painted black, and we had to wear black clothes, and when I actually made measurements on people, I also wore black gloves and a black mask because I wanted to block all of my biophotons and just measured the subject. So here's Harry at the control electronics, which he put together, and the computer recording data. And this is a close-up of the detector, which is basically about a 1-inch by 6-inch tube with a black cap over it held together with rubber bands on this dental arm of the old dental lamp. And there's a on FOSS view, we pull this cap off when we do the measurements. Here's an example of the detector just showing you mock measurements. All of this would be done in total darkness, but then you couldn't see anything. So we turned on the lights just to show you how we make measurements. If we were going to measure the third eye, one of the dantians, we would take the cap off and bring it to touch this area of the forehead. We typically, in this experiment, measured the palms of the hands and the fingertips. We weren't measuring the dantians yet in this first experiment. And there I am showing you how we would measure the palm of the hand of a particular energy healer. And again, all of this is mocked up so you can see what we're going to do in the dark. But there we are in our black clothes in the interior of the chamber. So there were some previous studies in the literature, not too many, on human biophoton emission. And it said that the human hands emit light, especially the palms of the hands and the fingertips, including the fingernails. And they were only on single human subjects. No one had published any studies looking at the interaction of, let's say, a healer and a patient, or lovers, or anybody interacting. And I thought, well, why not? Let's do it. So that was the essence of our experiment. And these were our research questions. Number 1, is there a change in biophoton emission from the hands of energy practitioners before and after energy therapy? Number 2, is there a change in biophoton emission from the hands of patients before they receive and after they receive energy therapy? And number 3, can we measure biophoton emission during energy healing as well? So it's a quantitative study because in every case we're counting photons. I also asked them to assess their well-being and satisfaction with the experiment using a Likert scale. So here is an example of data, but this is without people present. It's important to close the door and measure what's going on in the dark closet without people to know what's called the dark count. The detector, by the way, works on what's called the photoelectric effect, and you don't have to understand that, except that Einstein got his Nobel Prize for this effect. If you shine light on a metal, it gives off electrons, and that they amplify the signal of the light that is impinging on a metal. So that's the effect, and therefore the reason that the data is in volts. And we later convert that voltage to photons by calibrating our detector, and we measured, as you see, for hours, many seconds. And it's pretty constant. There's a little bit of dance in the data. That's noise. And that's called thermal noise. It's due to heat liberating electrons as well. So we counted for 5 hours, and we found that the detector counts a background count of 7 counts per second, or 7 photons, but that's called a dark count. It's really noise in the system, and it will always be there. So here are procedures with human subjects. I picked healers and clients or patients that did not know one another. We assigned them. And we had them come at the same appointment time, and they just met each other for the first time. I explained the experiment and procedures. They, of course, signed consent forms and asked any questions, the informed consent procedure. And we also had a demographic form to learn more about their backgrounds and the health complaints of the clients and certain beliefs of the healers about whether they believe that photons might be involved in this or not. what their handedness was, left to right, dominant hand, and a few other questions. And then the healer and client went into the dark chamber with me, and Harry remained at the control station and actually collected the data. So then we spoke to each other through the walls of the closet. We sat in darkness for about 10 minutes waiting for the photodetector to stabilize. And then I moved the detector around. We took 2-minute measurements for each hand, and we did left hand and right hand of both subjects. And in between the hand measurements, we did what's called a baseline measure. I positioned the detector against the black wall so that it could not see any photons. And that was baseline. And then we had the energy healer conduct a 20-minute healing session on the patient. We were still in the box at that time. And during that time, I put the detector above the heads, 1/2 meter above the heads of the practitioners. And I also had a black hat on, so I was restricting any light that might come out of the top of my head as well. And then we went back and measured 2 hands of each palm of the left and right hand of both subjects. And then we had one final baseline, placing the detector against the black wall. Then we exited the darkened chamber slowly and adjusted the ambient light of the room. And I had also some post-healing questionnaires about satisfaction, relaxation, and pain level in the case of the patients who were actually all pain patients who had suffered some pain. So here are my healer demographics. These were all very advanced healers. H1 through H5 are my designated numbers. They ranged in age from 42 to 78, and both female and male, Caucasian as well as Asian. They were Chinese in particular. And some of them did pure modalities such as Usui Reiki. Others did external Qigong. And there were several who had studied different modalities but then evolved their own practice after many years. And these were very seasoned healers who practiced over 8 years, up to as many as 40 years of doing energy healing. Their handedness, most were right-handed, one was left-handed. Whether they thought energy was connected with light is shown here. Most of them said maybe, yes, uncertain. I also measured heart rate variability, and this is a particular parameter called low frequency to high frequency ratio, which is related to the sympathetic to parasympathetic degree. And the lower this number is, the more relaxation. And anything under about 2.5 is normal. So it looks like healer 3 was still a little bit of stress, showing a value of 3.1. And then these were the values of relaxation, feelings of well-being, and satisfaction with the experimental run following their time in the box. It was a Likert scale from 0 to 10. And as you can see, all the values are pretty high, with the exception of maybe this one value of 6. So the next slide shows my patient demographics and outcome measures. The patients were repeated in some cases, all female, all Caucasian. They weren't studying modality, although one did a little Reiki for a few years, but wasn't actively practicing in this case. She was serving as a patient. Handedness, they were all right-handed. In terms of whether they thought energy was connected with light, is shown here. Their various health issues, back pain, urethritis, thyroiditis, etc. They were all pain complaints, and their level of relaxation, well-being, and satisfaction with the experiment at the end are shown here. They're all pretty high scores on a Likert scale of 0 to 10. So here's the kind of data that we got, and this is the raw data. So now I'm plotting the photon count in terms of the voltage that we measured and time. And we were in the box at least probably an hour and a half to do these experiments. So this is the run, the experimental run with healer number 1 and patient number 1. And so we were in the box, baseline, and then healer palms were measured. The right is R, the left is L. And then we measured baseline again, and then patient palms, right and left. And then the healing session. Now here the detector was placed above all of us. I was blackened out, practically wearing a burqa in there. And as you can see, there were 3 distinct peaks of light during the healing session, which was 20 minutes. And what was interesting about these peaks of light is that they coincided with words spoken by the healer. Of course, we would like the healer to turn on her energy right here when we said now begin healing. But that's not how the energy flows. The energy may take its time to flow. And she announced when her energy was really flowing and said, my guides have arrived when this peak went up. And then again, here another guide arrived and energy was flowing very well here. So it was interesting to note that the light emission that we measured correlated with subjective statements made by the healer during her healing session about her perceived assistance from her spiritual guides and her sense of giving energy. And following the session, then we measured the post measurements of healer palms with baselines interspersed, patient palms, and then exited the chamber. So that was one particular experimental run. We did 5 of these, and each of them were different. Ignore this stuff in the beginning. We had some issues here. But healer palms here were actually much lower in magnitude of biophoton emission. The patient actually was emitting more light. This healing session consisted of one spike of light early in the session, and then it was pretty quiet for the rest of the time, and then the healer palms at the end and patient palms. In this run with healer 3 and patient 3, healer palms were very hard to discern, and this is the Reiki healer, as I recall. Who later told us she didn't feel particularly great this day that she was here, but her energy, the emission was practically like baseline. The patient actually was a stronger emitter. And the healing session was pretty quiet. It's hard to say there was any light really emitted during the session. And healer palms also low at the end, and patient palms a bit higher. In this session, this is healer 4, patient 4. This particular healer was a Qigong master giving external Qi, and Qi masters may use sword fingers. Sword fingers are when you put the index and the third finger together, when you hold them parallel and close together, and you take the thumb and you hold the fourth and fifth finger together. So it's a little bit like a peace sign, but the fingers are, index finger and third finger are together. So this healer said he works through sword fingers, so he wanted us to measure them. So we added that as a measure. And as you can see, we got some interesting high values, higher values from sword fingers of the healer than his palms. And then at the end he wanted to cup his hands around the detector, so we did that as well. And this healing session was pretty quiet, although there might be a small peak of light toward the end. And the last run that we did, healer 5 and patient 5, this was another Qigong type healer, and we measured his sword fingers, and as you can see, they're much higher than his palms, although his healing session was quiet. And as I recall, the results of this healing session were dramatic, however, because the patient had suffered back pain for some 10 years and had a remission, which was really remarkable, and has also stayed. So we were quite thrilled with that. So sword fingers of the healer are emitting more even after the healing. And there are the patient palms. So I put all the data together here in a table. So the pre-treatment count rate in counts per second, how many photons per second per square inch really is coming from the hand. And these are the various subjects, healer 1, patient 1, healer 2, patient 2, healer 3, patient 3, etc. And the post-treatment counts are over here. Now what you can see looking at the mean values is that if you look at healer palms, right and left, you're going to see that right hands tend to emit a little bit more than left. And I believe this data was significant, even though we had small numbers, because we measured so long, we really measured close. Our standard error was about 0.1 photon. So a difference of about 2 photons is significant. So we're talking about the right hand seems to emit more than the left hand. That's very interesting. True for the sword fingers as well. And there wasn't such a distinction for the patient palms, maybe, but hard to say. And post-treatment, we saw clearly that the energy of the healer went down. Initially was 20.6, now 18.4, and that is a significant difference. Healer swords also went down. And patient palms went down a little bit. And I have these figures in red that are the largest counts from sword fingers of this particular subject who was practiced external chi for a very long time. So this fits with very ancient ideas that go back to thousands of years that were also reiterated in Theosophy, a movement from the late 19th century. This is a diagram from a Theosophical textbook showing a minor chakra, the whorl of energy in the palm of the hand, and how the fingertips are also whorls of energy or emitters that are major. We didn't measure this wrist point, but I know that that's an important point in acupuncture, inner and outer gate on the wrist. And this is another way of looking at biophotons from a group in Japan where they put a hand into a camera and they do imaging of the biophotons coming out of the body. You have to hold your hand in that camera a long time, and that's very different from our measurements, which were counting for short times. This is probably an hour's worth of imaging of a hand, and you can see the index finger and the third finger are the strongest emitters, particularly the index finger, which is very interesting. And this is reminiscent of the art of Michelangelo. This is in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. And there we have the creator extending an index finger, touching Adam's finger, enlivening Adam through the index finger. It's just fascinating to think that the index finger is the largest emitter from the human body. And it's intuitively known in ancient times, in art, and still today we find in science. So conclusions from this little study. Biophoton counting from the human body is one type of biofield measurement, and what we did measure from the palms of hands and also fingertips match those in the published literature, and that is about 18 to 45 counts per second per square inch. The biophoton emission of healers and patients both showed a slight decline after energy healing, and the right or yang hand emits more biophotons than the left or yin hand. Yang and yin are terms from Oriental philosophy. So the more masculine or yang hand is really doing more emission. The yin may be more receptive. And in other experiments with the BioWell device that I told you about last time, I found a lot more energy coming out of the right hand during active emission by energy healers than the left hand using the BioWell device, which looks at induced light emission. That's a different type of light. It's very different from native biophoton emission, where we're not adding an electric field here. It's just what the bare skin is emitting. So all 5 healing sessions showed unique biophoton emission patterns, as you saw. And I have to say that our initial measurements, this was one of the first studies that we did on energy healing. The reliability is questionable because we only had a single detector placed above the participants, but that's what we had and that's why we did it. And now we're setting up a second biophoton detector. We want to measure both healer and patient at the same time and also look for cross correlations between biophoton emissions from interacting subjects, for example, from 2 lovers. I think it would be fascinating to see lovers when they're agreeing and harmonious, and then lovers when they're having an argument or feeling disagreeable. And we intend to do some experiments like that to look at the idea that biophotons are biocommunication and possibly conveying information. So biophoton assessments offer information about our energy regulation and interaction, and they may shed light on practices such as meditation, qigong, yoga, energy healing, as well as human relationships. We're energetically interrelated with each other, the earth, and the cosmos. And understanding this more deeply could draw us into greater harmony with one another and the environment. So I think that's it for the talk. And I'm now going to go back and unmute you. Figure out how to do that. Oh dear. I think I have to do it one at a time. Okay. My master button didn't work. So I'm just going through to unmute you so we can have some discussion.
Can you hear me?
Beverly, this is Kathy. I have a question for you.
Yes.
When you measure the healer and the patient, and that you measure their palms first, and then during the healing session, there's really not much noticed, and then there's a lot noticed. Is it because they're connecting at that time that it goes a little bit lower, and then the biophotons start really emitting at a higher level before and then after again?
I'm not sure I understood your question, because they do emit more in the beginning, and after the energy session they emit less. And I'm thinking it's not clear, but other people have done this sort of experiment. A couple colleagues I have worldwide, and they got a similar effect. I think it's a relaxation effect.
Oh, you know, I was wondering that as well, if that's probably bringing them in sync.
Could be, but also I think there's a relaxation effect. The task is over. Whatever task you're doing, when it's over, you know, you can sit back and relax. There's always an anticipation of a task ahead, and even a reception of energy, and then there's a relaxation effect.
Yeah, makes sense.
But in any case, it was interesting, and now we realize we need to use 2 detectors, but the detectors cost a lot of money. You know, it cost us $12,000 just for the hardware to get this thing rolling, because it's all custom hardware, and I'm not counting the time it took to put it all together and to calibrate it. I mean, just creating the box, electrically wiring it, creating a way to collect data, and the software-hardware interface. What you don't see behind all of that is enormous. I mean, you can buy a tube. One of those photomultiplier tubes is $2,600, but then good luck. You have to attach it. You have to create all the electronics. Then you have to do hardware-software interface. Then you've got to write the software. Then you've got to, you know, run baseline experiments before you bring in people. So there's a lot of groundwork that went into before we could even bring in people.
Yeah, makes sense.
Let me tell you some interesting experiments we did subsequently that I didn't show you here because I didn't want to take up too much time. But I also work with gifted practitioners who engage in, shall we say, psychoenergetic states. For example, I'm quite intrigued with medical intuitives. You know, whatever they do, they can diagnose. I mean, fascinating, through intuition. So we put the detector near the third eye. And we've got one practitioner who does this, and there's a School of Medical Intuition here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there's several of these folks, but one in particular who could open and close the third eye. And when she opens the third eye, something like 35% more photons start coming out right then. And then she can close the third eye, and then the count goes down. Then she opens it again, and the count goes up. Fascinating. So if this is junk light, well, we've got some evidence to the contrary. You know, to what mainstream would say. And then there was a practitioner from Portugal that we measured who, during an energy healing that he gave, which was with passion and love, his heart emitted almost 400% more photons, his heart region, because we put the detector at the heart area and found that. Now, 400% is a lot, and can't explain it any other way except that he's turning on the energy. And he's cranking up the heart chakra.
Huh.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I find it really fascinating that the heart and the brain are so different in probably the photons that they emit, that the heart is much stronger than the brain is.
Yes. Well, also with the electromagnetic activity, the heart waves are much stronger than brain waves. The heart, as you read in Ashman, is the strongest emitter energetically of the human body. And it is really the centerpiece of your energy body.
Yeah.
Beverly, I've got a question. I don't remember if you stated this, but the participants, not the healers, but those that received the healing, were they in belief of this program? Were there any of those that did not believe that they could be healed?
Yes, they were all in belief. They were interviewed to ascertain whether they would volunteer their time, and they were certainly hopeful that they would have pain reduction, and they did feel that. So that was the good news. These were pretty extraordinary healers, as you saw from their credentials.
Right. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if you sifted in a couple non-believers and the impact of them receiving the healing energy.
Right. Yes, there's so many permutations that one could now research just based on this kind of simple experiment.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Any other questions or points of discussion?
Dr. I have a question. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear
could
me?
You just, yes, I can. Can you speak to given the model of healer-patient and outcome, and could you compare that to coach-athlete and outcome, and if the and sort of tie in the relaxation effect that the task is over. The task is like athletic performance. How do you see this experiment playing out in the relationship between coach and an athlete?
I've never looked at that, but I am having a conversation with a coach next Monday who's interested in my work in this regard. So I'm not so sure how that would be, because I really haven't worked with athletes outside of my running a field experiment at the Sports Energy and Consciousness Conference a couple weeks ago. So it's really outside of my expertise working with athletes, but apparently some very prominent coaches are now interested in taking this work into what they do to see if it can't tell them something about the inner states of athletes and what the zone really is all about.
I'm very interested in that.
Yes. It certainly has a lot of
I think you could define zone. Yes. I think you could define zone and flow even with what you. This is like a very scientific project.
Yes. Yes, I think, you know, in the zone needs more definition. Of course, it's kind of a Zen thing. And, I mean, just watching our local team here, the Warriors, who did some extraordinary passes, you know, like passing the ball backwards, not knowing that there was somebody there to catch it just in the nick of time. I mean, how does that happen? What kind of biofield communication is going on between these players? I think something is going on. So I think there's a place for this in big athletics for training biofield awareness and communication. So I see caller 2 is trying to talk, but I can't hear them. I hope I turned their thing on. Let me see. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? And Richard Hutchinson, I have to say, I can't somehow unmute your phone. I don't know what it is. I am clicking on it and it still reads red. So something is fishy with the program. If you need to reach me, then text me at the bottom in the chat box. So, any other points to discuss? No questions? Let me say that I'm going to have a third online meeting Some of you missed, well, a couple people missed this one, but some of you also missed the first one. And I'm going to have a makeup meeting. It'll be optional to attend, but I also will give a talk and record it as I've done before, and then post it on YouTube. So I'm not sure when that will be, but probably on a Wednesday toward the end of the course, not the last week, however. But in a couple weeks, bare minimum, try to spread these things out. So you'll have another opportunity, and I hope you'll join us even if you're not required to. So, any final remarks before we call it a day?
No, this was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing and hearing from you again, and also working with you in the course. You know, it's my passion, energy medicine and the human energy field, and look forward to working with you in an ongoing way. So, ciao for now. I'm going to stop recording, and we'll get back to our online course. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.